Welcome, everyone. Before we officially begin, I wanted to just set the room a bit with some housekeeping details and instructions. My name is Caitlin O'Donnell. I'm with the Talwar Network Secretariat, and I work with the For Youth by Youth movement and the folks who have organized this webinar today. Before we begin, again, I just wanted to cover a few details about today's session. First, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to future audiences on the Talwar Network website. And so by attending, just please note that this webinar is being recorded. If you prefer not to appear in the recording, we recommend that you keep your camera off and refrain from sharing any identifying information in the chat. We have several accessibility features available to ensure that everyone can fully participate today. We have spoken language interpretation in Spanish. To access this, you can click the interpretation icon towards the bottom of your screen. It looks like a globe, or three dots might show up towards the bottom of your screen as well on your Zoom toolbar, and you can select Spanish as your preferred language. You can choose to mute the original audio that will be coming through in English if you prefer only to hear the interpreter. Additionally, we have two ASL interpreters who have joined us today who will be available, and you can access the sign language interpretation again through the interpretation icon or the three dots that will appear on your toolbar. To join that, we'll also be sure to spotlight the interpreters so that you may view them as you're listening in and as you're viewing the webinar. We also have live transcription and closed captioning available that you can enable on your own screen by clicking the two C's, CC, or live transcript button on your Zoom toolbar as well, and you can select show subtitles so that you can follow along the conversation via text. We'll just remind people to kindly stay muted during those presentations to avoid background noise and interruptions. We will have a chance to break out into smaller conversation breakout rooms where we can have conversations. And in the meantime, feel free to add any questions or thoughts that you may have into the chat, and we'll be sure to take a look at that. Again, the breakout rooms, we will be breaking out after the panelists present their information and do their presentations. If you are requiring the interpretation and translation services, we just ask that you stay in the main room, and the main room will function as another breakout room, and we'll be having a smaller discussion there. If you do find yourself in a breakout room, there is an option for you to return to the main room as well. And if you have any questions or with any of these accessibility features or need assistance, feel free to send me a direct message. You can send Cameron a direct message as well. And with that, I'll turn things over to Cameron to kick us off officially, taking a pause just to start the recording. So it looks like we're already recording, so that's great. Over to you, Cameron.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thank you for the housekeeping notes. Folks, you're all very welcome to week 3 of our webinar series on the For Youth by Youth inaugural cohort and our inaugural webinar series looking at conscious leadership and global solidarity. This week, we have a really exciting topic of participatory action research and some exciting panelists, Julie, Faiza, Francis, and Evelyn, who will share their insights with us under the careful and watchful facilitation of Bakile, one of our For Youth by Youth consultants. So my job is just to welcome you here and to introduce our wonderful facilitator. So Bakile is a health systems researcher and advocate, passionate about community empowerment and evidence-based policy changes. A former MasterCard Foundation scholar, he holds a Bachelor of Social Work and a Master's of Public Health from the University of Cape Town. He's currently based in London, where he works within adult community mental health services at the National Health Service. He has a strong background in community development, mental health counselling, project management, and participatory action research. Bakile's work focuses on strengthening health systems in low and middle income countries. His recent research explores cross-border patient migration within the Southern African Development Community, aiming to advance regional health coordination and epidemic preparedness. He's a committed civic leader and has been recognised by the Duke of Edinburgh International Award, the Golden Key International Honour Society, and of course the Talwar's network of engaged universities. He's our virtual workshop and engagement facilitator alongside with Larry for the For Youth by Youth cohort series. And he's passionate about empowering young people to drive collective, collaborative, and transformative change. So Bakila, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Cameron, and thank you, everybody. Hello, Sanibonani Molweni. As introduced, my name is Bakila, and I'm honored to welcome you to the third session of the For Youth by Youth inaugural webinar series. And as introduced, I'm speaking to you from England, where I am currently based. So I think this is a very important topic. And before we dive into today's theme, I just wanted us to pause and to reflect on something which is quite fundamental. It is my core belief that research at its core is power. It is actually one of the most powerful tools we have in order to shape the world and how the world sees itself. Research produces knowledge, it drives decisions, it defines what is possible and what is not. And over the history, research has radically improved the human condition. It is through inquiry, experimentation, innovation that we discovered penicillin, developed treatments and vaccines for HIV and COVID-19, learned how to curb the spread of TB and cholera, created clean water systems, and designed engineering models that keep our cities, our communities, and our villages running. In the social sciences, research has shifted paradigms from civic rights to gender equity to climate justice and restorative justice. But let us be honest, research has also been used to justify exclusion, dehumanization, and violence. And colonial regimes have used pseudoscientific findings to rationalize racial segregation. In South Africa, for example, research has been used and was used to legitimize Bantu education, a systematic undereducation of Black South Africans, and to uphold apartheid spatial segregation. In global health, access to life-saving vaccines and treatments has often been dictated by economic geography rather than human need. Entire communities have been overstudied but underserved, spoken about but never spoken with. And as I have highlighted, research has been used as a catalyst. It is power. It drives policies. It drives decision-making. And it drives how we perceive and how we interpret the world that is around us. And whether it is explicit or implicit, it does carry an agenda, a set of assumptions, a framework that defines what is valid and what is neutral and who gets to be the expert. And for decades, knowledge produced in the global north has been dismissed as anecdotal or context-specific, while from the global north, it is seen as universal, rigorous, and exportable. This bias has been quite an effective way of silencing the experiences and intelligence of communities across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, so-called the Global South. And so today, before we celebrate the power of research, we must also interrogate it. We must ask who asks the question, who gets to answer those questions, and whose knowledge counts and whose knowledge is dismissed. And this brings us to participatory action research, also known as PAR, which is the focus of today's conversation. PAR, it is my conviction that PAR is not just a method, it is a movement, a philosophy, a refusal to accept the status quo. It insists that those most affected by injustice must not be passive subjects of inquiry, but active co-creators of knowledge and change. In PAR, local communities become researchers, activists, and policymakers, interrogating their realities, analyzing their challenges, and acting collectively to transform their futures. At a time that traditional research often reinforces hierarchies and overlooks marginalized voices, PAR offers a liberating alternative. It challenges the very top-down models, insisting on co-creating hierarchies and overlooking marginalized voices. PAR, in my opinion, offers a liberating alternative. It challenges, as I said, challenges this top-down status quo. And I've seen this in my own research journey, where for my master's thesis at the University of Cape Town, I explored the implementation of formal cross-border patient migration, focused on government-funded programs. And at the core of this research, it was not just about policy, it was about people. It sought to understand how marginalized patients in Eswatini, also known or previously known as Swaziland, across the borders in search of life-saving care, because the services they need are unavailable at home. And using interpretive policy analysis, which are deeply aligned with the ethos of participatory research, I explored not just what policies exist, but how they're experienced, interpreted, and contested. And what I found was revealing. It was that policymakers, patients, policymakers, and hospital administrators also government-funded programs or government-funded cross-border programs differently. Some saw it as a lifeline, a logistical challenge, or a policy headache. These differences in systems of meaning influence how decisions were made and whose needs were prioritized. Despite formal cross-border agreements, healthcare access was riddled with challenges, long waits, miscommunication, financial gaps, and sometimes tragic outcomes. One caregiver told me, we don't just cross the border for medicine, we cross the border for dignity as we look for better healthcare. The lesson is clear. Systems fail not because of the lack of information, but they fail because of the lack of inclusion. And that brings us into today's conversation. And as a Nigerian urban scholar, Dr. Lawson reminds us, communities are not passive recipients of development. They're architects of their own survival. And so today, we are joined by 4 incredible individuals who live this philosophy in their everyday life and in their everyday work. And I have the pleasure of firstly introducing Anjuli Falberg. Anjuli is a sociologist and co-director of the Building Together Research Collective. Her research focuses on urban violence and social movements in Latin America, where she uses participatory action research to collaborate with communities in favelas and marginalized urban zones. Her award-winning book, Activism Under Fire, explores the politics of nonviolence in Rio's gang territories. She currently leads a PAR project in El Salvador and Honduras. I also have the pleasure of introducing Faiza Ashad. Faiza is a marketing tech manager and clinical psychologist whose activism focuses on education, justice, and cross-cultural collaboration, her leadership dynamics. Her interdisciplinary perspective, blending technology, human behavior, and systems thinking, offers a valuable insight into structures that shape youth engagement and reform. Francis Arunaitwe. Francis is a youth engagement expert with 10 years of experience in leading participatory research initiatives in Africa. He helped lead the MasterCard Foundation's Youth Tank and currently works with FYBY International on youth entrepreneurship. His work bridges the gap between evidence and advocacy, emphasizing the power of young people to shape their own future. And lastly, Aiblin. Aiblin is a Galloway-based artist, local councillor, and community advocate, serving with social democrats, deeply rooted in the spirit of Ireland's West. She believes in creativity as a powerful driver for inclusion and justice. Aiblin's grassroots work emphasizes amplifying local voices, especially through artistic collaboration and civic participation. Together, they remind us that research is not neutral, but with the right methods, it can be transformative. So, as we begin, I invite you and I to hold this question in mind. How can we move from research on communities to research with communities and by communities? And how might that reimagine the future we are building together? Thank you for being here. And I'll start with an introduction from Anjuli. If you can just introduce yourself and lay the ground for us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation to be here, Mbakila. Thank you so much. That was such a wonderful way of introducing PAR. I feel like you hit on all of the important notes of why this is so important, and how research really is a tool that can be used for so much good, but it also can be used for bad. And one of the goals of PAR is to ensure that what we're doing with research is actually benefiting the communities that the research is about. And so we only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to be very brief. I started doing PAR in 2014 when I was working on my PhD. I grew up in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I was working and doing some research in a community right next to where I grew up called City of God. You might have heard of the movie. And I was very aware of my role as both an outsider from this community and also somebody who came with a number of privileges, and the potential that I could misuse the power that I had as an outside researcher in this community. And so I've been very deeply engaged in this community since then. Now I'm doing some work in Central America. I also teach a course on PAR. It's actually on Zoom in June every summer for people who want to learn, because there are very few opportunities in a lot of graduate programs to learn how to do this. And in the time that I have, I wanted to just show you a few photos of the big PAR project that I did in 2017 that has since led to the founding of the Building Together Research Collective. So I'm going to share my screen and just show you a few photos. All right, are you all able to see the slideshow? Awesome. So in 2017, I had been in this community for 3 years as an ethnographer. So I had built a lot of relationships. And City of God, very briefly, is a community in Rio de Janeiro. It has about 60,000 residents. It is a low-income community, often called a, quote, favela. Very high rates of unemployment. Let's see if we can get this to challenge, of informal housing, and high rates of mental health challenges, and as you might imagine, a number of problems with just lack of access to government resources. In addition, it's a community that's governed by drug traffickers. And I should mention that all of my work is focused on neighborhoods that are governed by gangs in Latin America. And so I had been in this community for a few years, and I received some funding to do an additional research project, and I decided I really wanted to do a PAR project. And so the first thing that I did was I talked to a good friend of mine, Ricardo. He's a resident of City of God, born and raised there, racial justice activist, very well known to the community. And I invited him to do this project with me. And we spent many months just talking about what's the kind of data that this community needs, how can we produce data that's helpful, how can we do it in collaboration, how can we ensure that the budget is being used equitably, and to really promote participation as much as possible. And the decision that we made was that we really needed quantitative data, because policymakers, news, journalists, they love quantitative data because it's an easy way to say, X% of people are dealing with this. And the quantitative data that existed on this community was not collected by community members, and it often reproduced stigmas and certain perceptions of cultures of poverty and violence, rather than emphasize both the needs of the community, the ways the government was really letting the community down, and also the forms of agency and resilience that were in the neighborhood. So as we'll talk about, PAR is really based on promoting participation in every step of the project. And so one of the first things that we then did was do these community forums. They're similar to focus groups, where we just invited people to come and talk about what were the issues on their mind, what was most urgent to them, what was important to them, what did their everyday lives look like. And we ended up speaking to about 100 people. We were very conscious of involving people of all different age groups, racial profiles, professions across the neighborhood, just to make sure that the diversity of experiences was captured. We ensured that we provided people with really nice meals. We talked about the project in a way that would be very accessible to the community. We developed the survey in collaboration. So these are all residents from the community. And, we spent many, many days developing questions, honing the questions, deleting questions, adding questions and responses on all of the topics on the right. Then we hired a team of residents from across the neighborhood, provided extensive training on how to conduct, how to ask questions, how to, ensure that we as researchers were being ethical, that we were asking proper consent from participants. And the researchers who joined the team also provided us very valuable information on ways that we could better hone the questions and make sure that they were as accessible as possible. Then we went about collecting the data. So we went across the neighborhood, asking people, if they wanted to participate in the survey. So here are just a couple of examples of what that looked like. And you can see it was really residents asking residents based on questions that they themselves had created. Then we disseminated the findings. And so we hired somebody from the neighborhood to develop this flyer. We folded 3,000 of these brochures. It has some of the data from the study. And then we went around the neighborhood and disseminated the brochures and explained to people what they could do with this information and the value of this information for advancing different forms of policies or trying to bring resources into the community. We shared the results with a number of nonprofits, many of whom we had actually consulted ahead of time to make sure that we were developing questions that then they could use that data in applications for funding, in some of the activist movements that they were working on. And then we sent the findings to a number of news agencies to make sure that we were getting some of the data out there. And then finally, we worked on a number of publications, and a couple of the residents were listed on some of these publications. And then in 2019, we decided to turn this study basically into a collective so that we could continue to do research with this model ever since. I probably don't have enough time to talk about all of the different projects that we've done since then. This is our website, which you can find online. But we did a similar study on the impact of the pandemic in 2020 and 21 to 22. And you can see that many residents were involved in that. The residents themselves who were on the team then went around disseminating the information and presenting at a number of different academic forums, social forums, to policymakers, advocating for many of the changes that or resources that the study identified that were necessary in the community. And now we're actually working on a new project that the residents themselves are running without me. And I'm around as kind of like, I'll provide suggestions and I provide support. I'm helping to fundraise for the project, but really they have the capacity now to do this without me. And they're doing a new project on how art and culture are being used to promote mental health benefits in the community. That is the project I'm working on now, which I don't have time to tell you about. How am I doing on time?
We can just have like 30 seconds.
Okay. Sure. So that's the end of my slideshow, but I just want to mention that we're still doing this research. And I noticed that there's a lot of interest, particularly from the new generation, to do participatory research. And I see a shift in how we think about particularly academic research, because there has been historically a perception that it's only, quote, rigorous if you don't include the community. And I'm excited to see that we're shifting to recognize that including the community actually produces much, much better and more relevant and more useful data. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anjuli. That's really, really very cool. And as I said, I like that inclusion of communities. And as one of the scholars from South Africa once said, co-creation of research and knowledge is not just luxury. It's the only way to build systems that include everybody. So that's really incredible that it's not just the experts, but communities become experts of their own knowledge. So that's very incredible. FYBY, I will come straight to you. If you can just lay the ground and introduce the work that you've been doing. Over to you.
Thank you, Vakile. That was a lovely introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is FYBY Arshad, and I'm incredibly honored to be on this panel. Like Vakile said, I graduated with a degree in clinical psychology, and I currently work as a product retention manager. Unrelated, but somehow related. We can talk about that at a future time. Outside of work, I stay connected to my community by working with underprivileged children to increase access to quality education. I'm also a proud alum of the Next Generation Leaders program. My first experience with participatory action research was actually back in college in 2021. In my thesis, when I was working on my thesis, I used a single case experimental design to measure the impact, the psychological impact of an intervention on one participant. By the end of my thesis, I had quantitative data, so their ratings on a Likert scale, but I also had their subjective input and their impact on the design by the end of it. If I'm being very honest, and Julie spoke about this a little bit, back when I was working on this thesis, I was actually very insecure of the quality of the work that I was doing, because all of my classmates were working on traditional experimental designs that were seen as real science and more objective, hence more valuable. But having a participant just felt too subjective, felt too weak, for the lack of a better word. I cannot go back and ask past FYBY what she was thinking, but this is how I recall how she felt. But fast forward a couple of years, it's been a couple of years since I graduated, and participatory action research is the core of everything that I do, whether it's in my full-time job or in my activism and work with my community, or even when I'm trying to see if what type of interactions and work that I need to work on with other organizations. I am constantly using PAR as my way of figuring out what it is that needs to be done and how I can actively contribute. I've seen firsthand how powerful it is when, like Bakilin and Julie were saying, when people from the community become owners and not just subjects of research. When you remove that power dynamic, the shift that happens. And I'm really excited today to talk about how I went from being insecure and not confident in this approach to one of the biggest advocates. And I'm also very, very excited to be learning from the beautiful panel that we have today. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, FYBY. Communities not just being subjects, but owners of knowledge. That's very incredible. Thank you very much for setting the tone, FYBY. And now I'll move over to Francis to briefly introduce themselves and set the tone and just tell us what they've been up to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, please. Just to echo, my name is Arenita Francis, and I hold a bachelor's degree in development studies from Makerere University. My experience with participatory action research is not that formal and so scholarly, but it's a journey that I had an opportunity to be part of participatory action research projects and also contribute to make sure that, there is authenticity after establishing myself as an advocate for youth participation, youth engagement, and all that kind of stuff. And my journey actually starts with my involvement with the MasterCard Foundation Youth Think Tank Initiative. This Youth Think Tank Initiative was a purely Pan-African youth-led research initiative that was actually led by young people. Young people participated in the contextualization of questions, and also defining the direction and what the output and the outcomes of the research could be. And MasterCard Foundation recognizing that, however much we want to work with young people, we cannot sit somewhere in Toronto, in Canada, to define what young people need. The young people are supposed to tell us what they want and which direction they want to take. So when that initiative was launched in East Africa, we contextualized, and after a year, the young people had to define what the next topic had to be. They had to define what the next research questions had to be. And, participation in such kind of a process is what grounded me in becoming an advocate of youth participation. There is nothing for us without us. There is nothing for young people without young people. And the future of transformative development lies in young people, in communities defining solutions to matters that affect them. You know, besides sitting somewhere as a scholar, as a PhD holder, and you come up with a topic that you want to research and write your PhD thesis. At the end of the day, what is the impact of that thesis? What is the impact? Is it all about you attaining your PhD, or that thesis is supposed to contribute to solutions? It can only contribute to solutions if the people are not treated as subjects. Just like FYBY said, they can only lead to solutions if the people that you want to conduct the study on are part of the process, because they live the experiences and they really know. I remember my professor telling me that development is inherent. Development comes from within. It is not external. It cannot be imported. It has to come from within the people themselves, because they are the ones that are affected. And to me, that is what participatory action research means. And after that experience, that is when I took on initiative. I took initiative to challenge the definition of what decent employment means as the way International Labour Organization defined it. And I rallied a number of young people from 9 African countries in East Africa, in South Africa, in West Africa, and in the MENA. I reached out to young people and we came up with a list of 10 questions to conduct research across the continent. It was online. They were webinar series like this, but they attracted the interest of International Labour Organization. They attracted the interest of international and development agencies. The young people are redefining. The way you're defining decent employment in the International Labour Organization documents, it is not what relates to me as a young person in Uganda, in Africa. It is general, but to me, this is what it means. And, being part of that entire process in disseminating, in analyzing and validating, and also making sure that the results of that research, are solutions to the issues that are affecting, especially young people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frances. I like what you said about in essence, moving from the ivory towers and going straight into the people and working with the people. And as I mentioned in the introduction, in the opening, that even the best intentioned policies and decisions can collapse if the voices of those affected are not part of the design and implementation. And I think that's a very wonderful reflection, which speaks to the importance of inclusion and importance of working with the communities, not just telling them, and a top-down approach, a hierarchical approach of telling communities that this is how things are done, but allowing communities to take a lead on that. So thank you very much for that wonderful reflection, Frances. And now I'm gonna go to Evelyn. If you could just introduce yourself and just quickly give us and lay the ground for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the introduction. I'm in awe listening to everybody else speak, and a little bit nervous as well. When Cameron first asked me about speaking about this, I was like, I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about PAR. And then through discussions, I suppose, and through thinking about it, I actually realized I had been living a bit of a PAR life my entire life. I grew up in a small community off the west of Ireland, not in Galway and Mayo, and everything was very much so community driven because we were a little bit further away from our local authority or local governance. And it was always things that got done. It was through the community. It was through the community voices, be it through tidy towns, be it through community sports games, things like that. And then as I got older and moved to a city, I found that sense of communication and participation wasn't really there. then I became a single parent, and I actually found that maybe that participation was there, but it was being overlooked. People who don't fit the norms in society, their voices often weren't being heard. They were left out. They were still being marginalized. And I was trying to find a way to kind of navigate my way through that. So through community work and volunteer work, I suppose I started getting access to politicians. I started lobbying to people, started bringing those voices forward. And then I ended up going back to university as a mature student, and I got very involved with the Students' Union, where young people constantly driving change, driving, like being a huge voice, getting up, getting out, protesting, coming together, trying to problem solve within their local areas, and then trying to figure out, how do we bring this to the regional level? How do we bring this to the national level? And through that work, and full disclosure here, I still haven't finished my undergrad degree. I do have a paper co-authored with one of my lecturers, though, which was very much so qualitative, quantitative, and ethnographical research, because we realised during the quantitative approach that voices actually weren't being properly heard. So we went back and we reflected on how best can we make sure that those voices are captured and that it resonates in the data to make sure that it will see more progressive change. I was fortunate enough then to be elected as education officer with the Students' Union, and through the work there, and again through collective participation and action, we secured funding for a new learning commons that was coming up, which really was a major achievement at the time. Now I know that might seem like something a little bit insignificant, but it was through working together in a collective group coming together that we made sure that happened. So then, I suppose, because I was seeing on the ground and at a community level then in the wider community as well as the university, I realised that voices were still not being quite heard at policy, and at a higher level, at the governance level, I suppose. And I figured elections were coming up, what harm in to try and maybe see could that voice get carried through at a political level, at a local level, and to try and see how we can make that work and what that would look like. So I've only been in the job for less than a year, and I was trying to think, how have I brought this participatory action with me into my work? And I was like, I haven't really yet. I haven't figured out quite how to do it yet. But then I realized we actually have achieved some wins. We are now going to be getting 3 community development officers for our city. And it's the first time that we've had that, again, hopefully to bridge that gap and to start getting those community voices more into our chambers, so that it's that again, I suppose, what the real issues are on the ground are coming through, and that we're providing for it. And one of the other actions that I'm really proud of that we took on when we started was we set up a participatory budget for the local communities, so that people could actually input what they wanted to see, and they were all given a public vote on that then. Now, we only secured a small amount of funding, but we'll hope that will increase, because we actually did see a significant increase of people that were communicating with us through the various channels when we were rolling that out. So in 10 months we have managed to do those 2 things, which I think is really good, and hopefully from today as well, I'll learn things that I'll be able to bring into my work, and that I'll be able to carry them forward. And hopefully the next time we meet up to speak, we can see what else we've achieved to be able to make sure that people really are at the heart of our decision making. I still haven't found a way to bring my creative side into the council space yet, but I am working on that. Previously, I would have done photography exhibitions with different community groups. One of my favorite ones was asking one of the towns in our area, what they liked about their area at the minute, what was good from the past, and what they hope to see from the future. And that was shown at a culture night, and I am actually hoping to do that with different groups now, right across the city, to see if we can literally build a big picture of what we want the city to look like in the next few years. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Evelyn. Thank you very much for just reminding us that, participatory approaches are not an optional sentiment. They're quite essential if we are to move beyond a surface level solution, or if surface level solutions and address the root causes of problems in governance and within the systems that we live in. So thank you very much for all your reflection, folks. And this is truly amazing. It's really inspiring to know and just reflect on how you've used PAR in your own work, and how I like what you said, Evelyn, around how sometimes we never think that we are actually leaving it in our research, because I think it was the same sentiment for myself, that I was like, I don't think I've worked specifically on PAR, but then when looking at the work and the research projects I've been part of, they have embedded that. And sometimes I leave it unconsciously or without realizing that. All right, so I am gonna pose a question, and I'm gonna go back to Anjuli. And I think we've really answered the processes of PAR and how the community-led inquiry shifts power dynamics, and how it's important to shift power dynamics and drive real change, and including the lessons that can be learned. But what I wanted to just reflect on is just to pose a question to our panelists, and I'll start with Anjuli. So reflecting on your work, what are the biggest opportunities and tensions that you encounter when trying to balance community-driven research goals with the demands of funders, institutions, and political systems? How do you navigate these challenges and stay true to participatory principles? Anjuli.
Yeah, that's such an important question, and I appreciate you asking. So when I think of these as each separate challenges, but I will say that overall, I often end up thinking of myself as like a bridge or a translator between institutions, especially because I work in communities that only speak Portuguese or Spanish, and often I'm asking for funding, or I'm working in institutions that primarily speak English. So I'm literally a translator, and then also thinking about different values and cultures that influence, these two kind of life worlds. And so, when I'm thinking about grants, and I'll just be super specific with my answers, I try to find the sweet spot between what the community is really interested in, what the funder is interested in. And then I speak the language of the funder, because if you don't get the grant. And then once I get the money, or we get the money, then we apply it the way that the community thinks is most important. And I try to be as transparent as possible, but I also acknowledge that some funders are more excited about PAR than others. And so whether I play up PAR or not is a very strategic decision, but recognizing that we will do PAR with the money no matter what. With institutions, part of it is just learning the institutional space very well, understanding the culture, looking for opportunities, sort of openings to advocate. And like as FYBY was saying, there tends to be a perception that this is not rigorous research. And so partly I have tried to be an advocate and explain to people why this is actually very important to try to change the culture. But very strategically, I've also built positive relationships with mid-level administrators who will help me gain access to, or lower the barriers. And politically, and I'll just stop here, the political systems, both local and national and global, that I work in are extremely sensitive. They tend to be very repressive. And the best way to navigate those is, one, to have very extensive security protocols, but two, most importantly, to ensure that the community is really determining what we can and cannot say, how we can and cannot proceed, when we can or cannot list somebody as a co-author, and really making decisions and being very, very flexible to adapt to those shifting challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anjuli, for sharing that insight. And I was just listening through and just listening how sometimes I think it's quite important to be institutionally strategic and finding that sweet spot and balancing those politics. Because as I said, there is an agenda behind every funding, behind every behind every sponsor, there is a hidden, whether it's explicit or implicit, there's always an agenda behind. So I think it's quite important to try and find that sweet spot balance, but still being convicted and still continue to say, however it looks like, I will proceed with PAR. So I think that's very, very interesting and quite impressive, navigating those politics. Anjali, I'm gonna go and hit straight to FYBY. Please just share your own knowledge of navigating that space.
Thank you, Vakile. I agree with everything Anjali said. It is very important to speak the language of the institution that you are requiring funding from. And the only thing I would add to that answer is I wouldn't underestimate the power of a good story. We often think that percentages and graphs and metrics drive people to want to be a part of your initiative or partner up with you. But I found in my work that a strong story about a community or people in the community is often, if not even more powerful. When you start the conversations with the story and you, like Anjali was saying, speak the language of the institution, it is a very wonderful way of breaking into a conversation where it might take weeks to convince, but that is powerful if it starts off with a story. The other thing that I have learned is that with PAR, the timeline is not as fast as funders would like it, because often they're looking for immediate impact, immediate results, something they can unfortunately put their name on and claim. However, the struggle with PAR is that it often takes time because you're working with the community and you're working within limited resources. So I often try to be very honest and upfront about the timeline part of it, to make sure that in the future we don't have any pressure to cut corners in the approach that we were trying to say. So those would be my two things.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, FYBY. And to be honest with you, I don't think there's anything that beats the power of a good story. And there's so many untold stories which still need to get into certain spaces and to certain institutions which have to be told. And those stories do shift the narrative. So I think that's a very powerful way of seeing how to shape the politics and navigate the power of story. And I think this is really quite sentimental within the For Youth by Youth, and how that movement comes across and how it has built up, or it was built up, the power of stories, and how that is quite powerful in shaping the narrative, but also putting question marks where there might have not been question marks as to what works and what doesn't work. So thank you very much for that reflection, FYBY. I'm going to pause and go straight into Frances. How do you navigate that political barrier of bureaucracy in a way, and still maintain PAR within your values and in your research?
Frances, you might be muted. Your audio just isn't coming through, Frances. I don't know if it's with your headset.
Okay, maybe in the meantime, whilst Frances is trying. Okay, you're back. Lovely.
Yes, as I had communicated earlier, my experience with participatory action research is in the context of youth participation, and in navigating such a scenario, I will say that we have to keep to the principle of advocacy. It is through advocacy that we bring out and speak out the voices of young people. We speak out the voices of the communities that we are representing in those participatory action research, kind of processes and initiatives. If the main point of participatory action research is bringing out the voice of the people, the voice of the communities. It's the dialogue between me, a researcher, and the donor has to be, it has to present the voice of the young people, making them buy in. How can we make the funders buy in to what we are presenting, to what the people in the communities that the research seeks to impact on, it's what they are seeking out for. Of course, I understand donors have tools. How do we get that our participatory action research kind of approaches and all kind of topics fit into the tools of the funders? And then also being intentional. Can we be intentional in identifying which funders fit in what we intend to achieve in participatory action research? Sometimes we lose direction when we always just want to win grants, when we always just want to win donations and forget our goal. What was our initial goal when we are starting this initiative? That is why I am saying that we have to be intentional and list down the names of the funders and zero down to the funders that align with what our initiative is seeking out for. Otherwise, if we just stick to, how can we win the donation? How can we win the grant? At the end of the day, we shall lose our values, we shall lose our intention, and we shall also lose direction. We shall also lose purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francis, on that wonderful reflection. And I think reflecting on youth participation, sticking to the principles of advocacy and enhancing the voices of communities and making sure that we are quite intentional. That's a wonderful reflection, Francis. And thank you very much for allowing us to reflect on that. And I'm going to move to Evelyn very quickly. And I just wanted to then pose a slightly different question. And I think there's been this emphasis on local knowledge and community empowerment. What do you think, and how do you think we can ensure that participatory action research, as we including communities and navigating this complex political systems, is not extractive or tokenistic, but remains a truly transformative tool for justice?
Oh my God, that's a very hard question. Threw me under the bus, Becky. I don't know. I suppose I think for me, it's about encouraging more people to come into politics with this mindset so that it's met in the middle somehow. And I'd like to think that we do have people at a senior level in politics who do want to see this change come through because they see the benefit of it. And I think for me, I was even just making notes about what Francis had said about, like, trying to that we're struggling to find funders. I found that myself when I was in university. It was great. The STEM subjects, they always had funders, but the soft sciences is like, social science is not a soft science. It needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be put up there with STEM to make sure that it gets that value, that we start seeing that value. So I think for me, to answer the question is we need to encourage more people to start bringing this into their work, into their political spheres. And I think PAR is very much so something that should be up there when it comes to politics and addressing the needs of the people, because at the end of the day, that is what we're supposed to be addressing. So for me, it's to try and carry PAR through with all of my work and to try and impart it onto the people that I encounter, to show them, well, actually, do you know what? Meet these people here with me from this community group and let them tell you their story.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in that way, it doesn't become a token and we just talking about their community, but the community is leading in that conversation, which I think is quite important.
And
I'm
bringing them along as well with you, I
Yep.
think is hugely important. I'm in a position now where I get invited to so many things, and instead of bringing my partner or a friend with me, I will put it out there to people in the different community groups to bring them along with me as well. And I usually do try and bring a variety of an age range with me, so people do understand that it's not just the older voice that's important, it is the younger voices that are important here too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. Bringing along the communities along and making them co-creators of the knowledge. Thank you very much for that, Aiblin. Truly appreciate. And I'm just going to go back before we head to the next part of this webinar, which will be the breakout rooms. I just wanted to start off with all our speakers, and just if they could just say one lesson that they have learned in their work or in their experiences in PAR, what would that lesson be? Just one word, just one highlight of what that lesson could be. One or two words in a way. I'll start with Anjuli.
Thanks. I would say relationship building has to come before anything else.
Absolutely. Relationship building before anything else. Thank you very much, Anjuli. Truly appreciate it. And then I am going to move very quickly to FYBY.
It's tough to sum it up, but I think the first thing that comes to mind is you don't need to be an expert or qualified in many ways if you're doing PAR. You just need to start with lived experiences and then build your initiative from there. It's a couple words, but yeah.
Wow, that's good. That's good. Lived experiences and the power of storytelling, because that's really, really powerful. Thank you very much, FYBY. Francis?
For me, participatory action research, it is the driver to shifting power and ensuring co-ownership.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Francis. The power shifting, co-creation and inclusion of communities as co-creators for the knowledge. Thank you very much, Francis. Truly appreciate. Aiblin?
I think persistence. Positive persistence. Never give up. It can be hard, but keep on going and go back to the community, and they will help build you up again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Persistence, go back to the communities, continue building those relationships and encourage those stories in order to encourage co-creation of knowledge by the community. Thank you very much to our panelists, and I'll hand over back to Caitlin, who's going to inform us about the next part of the webinar. Truly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bakile. So we're going to jump into our breakout rooms. And again, if you are following along with the interpretation channels, you're welcome to stay in the main room and you'll have a smaller conversation with Anjuli and I. But otherwise, you'll be invited to join a breakout room momentarily. And Bakile, did you want to give folks just a preview of what to expect in the breakout rooms? This is an opportunity for folks to ask questions. Each panelist will be in one individual room, and we'll have some For Youth by Youth consultants helping us along. Did I cover that?
Absolutely, absolutely, precisely. Thank you, Caitlin.
Okay, perfect. So I'll open the rooms and you're welcome to join when you can. Thanks. Hand things back over. I'll hand things back over to you, Bakile, to send us off with inspiration. Over to you.
Wow, thank you very much, Caitlin, and thank you very much for such an engaging time in the breakout rooms. Unfortunately, we didn't have much time. Our breakout room had to be cut very shortly, but thank you so much for the inspiration and the participation. And I just wanted to say that as we come to today's webinar, I want to thank each one of you, our speakers, who form part of our panel members, our participants, and the global community for showing up with the full attention and your openness and your courage in asking the questions. And I think very, very important questions which were asked in the conversation. And it was really inspiring to hear about all the work that you're all doing and how that implements into the co-creation of knowledge in our communities. And in essence, these webinars over the past 3 weeks, we've been parting of something truly meaningful. In week 1, we asked the question, what does it mean to lead with empathy and integrity? And we learned that leadership is not about just having all the answers. It is about being rooted in purpose, being vulnerable, and creating space for others to rise. In week 2, we explored the power of global solidarity, and we saw how movements that cross borders culturally, geographically, politically, can create ripples of hope in even the most divided spaces. And today, we turned inward, and we looked quite inside toward our communities, our methods, and our mindsets to examine how we do the work of change. We explored PAR, not just as a technical tool, but as a political act, a way of saying your voice matters, your story matters, and your knowledge is enough. We've had from a wonderful panelist members who, for me, I think they're just like trailblazers and change makers who are reimagining research, not as a top-down exercise, but as a collaborative force of healing and transformation in our communities. We've reflected on how systems have failed because they were designed without the people they were meant to serve. And we've seen that when communities lead the inquiry of research, they also lead with courage. I just wanted to leave us with this thought, and I said it at the beginning and in the opening, that research is not neutral. It never has been. It either upholds systems or it unsettles them. It either centers people or it erases them. But when young people, marginalized communities, and those closest to the problems are given the tools to investigate, co-create solutions, we don't just generate data, we generate justice. So I invite you to leave this space with a commitment, not just to participate, but to insist on participation in everything you do. Whether you're a student, a researcher, a policymaker, or a creative, your role in shaping knowledge and centering community voices is powerful. Let this not be the end of the webinar series, but the beginning of something deeper, deeper questions, deeper collaborations, and deeper courage. Because the truth is, the next generation of transformative research doesn't start with elite journals and private labs and PhDs. It starts here, in spaces like this, with people like you. So thank you. Stay connected, stay bold, and stay participatory. Let's keep building. Thank you very much, everybody. And I'll hand back over to John. And thank you so much for keeping attentive. Thank you. Have a good night, have a good morning, and a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I cannot add more. As every time, I want to send my little short survey. Please fill it out. Participation matters. That's what we are here for. And we want to make these sessions more engaging, more appropriate in the future. So that if you could just take 5 to 10 minutes, just fill it out. I can also share my QR code. Here we go. I hope it's visible. Those who have phones in their hands, we would appreciate if you take some time to fill out the survey. This is very important to us. And thank you all for taking part in this webinar session.